This is a Nissan E-NV200 electric van, and on these and many other Nissan vehicles, whether that's electric or combustion, you can end up getting a clicking noise, or it's probably better described as a cracking noise, when the vehicle moves forward or backwards. The issue is probably picked up sooner on the electric vehicles, whether it's a Nissan E-NV200 like this or a Nissan Leaf, because you don't have a combustion engine up front drowning out the noises. So on electric vehicles, you hear all the noises from the vehicle, whether that's the brake vacuum pump or the brake pads rubbing on corroded brake discs. But this issue of clicking drive shafts affects all Nissan vehicles, and I probably notice it on the electric Leafs and E-NV200s at about 30,000 miles. So on this video, I'm going to show you how you fix this on a Nissan E-NV200, but it's a very similar procedure on the other vehicles as well. And this is something you can do yourself without too much experience and with the minimal tools, but I'll go through that in a minute. And as for the cost, you can do it yourself for about £50, and I've heard that main dealers are charging £300 to £400 for this job. So even if you haven't got the tools, you could go out and buy all the tools as well and do it for half the price. So let's see if I can show you the problem first. So this particular van is 2 years old and it's done 38,000 miles, and it is doing it. And it makes a sort of a cracking noise when you lift off the accelerator and the regen kicks in, or you accelerate. And it's when that drive shaft is moving like that, you get that loud crack. So let's see if I can show you. So I've got another E-NV200 here, and it's got the same issue. Not quite as bad as the other one, but it does need doing. So we're going to do it on this one. So the issue is the torque on the drive shaft that comes through the hub here. And there's two ways of doing it. You can do the quick method, which I'm going to do in this video, which is what the dealers will do. And I'm going to follow the Nissan TSB. And that's where you move the drive nut here, push the drive shaft in a bit, and then lubricate the outer and inner surfaces, put a new nut on and torque it back up. So that's the quick method, and that only takes about an hour maximum. It's strange they charge £300 to £400 for it, but anyway. And that will solve your problem. There is a more thorough method, and that is actually taking the hub and the knuckle off so you can get the drive shaft out properly and then lubricate all of the splines. But I'm not going to do that one in this video, because this particular van, the issue is really slight. You can hardly hear it, but I'm going to use this one as an example. So as I said, I'm going to follow the Nissan Technical Service Bulletin. So this is what the main dealers use. And you can see there the amount of vehicles this affects. It affects the Armada, the Cooper, the Ultima, the Cube, the Frontera. A lot of these we don't have in the UK. The GTR, the Juke, the Kicks, the Leaf, Maxima, Murano, NV200s, Pathfinder, Quest, Rogue, Sentra, Titan and Versa models. And I expect actually other vehicles are affected, but they would have a different service bulletin. But anyway, if you want to see this document, I will link it in the video description below. But we need a few things for this. So now I will just concentrate on the Nissan E-NV200, because the hub nut and the way that it locks to the drive shaft there is slightly different between the models. So you're going to need a few parts before you do this job, because supposedly the hub nut and the washer behind can't be reused, which I'll look at that in a minute. And also the split pin, obviously, yeah, you can't reuse those. So you're going to need to buy some parts, and this is where you got to suffer Nissan's extortionate prices for the part. So you're going to need two new hub nuts. And I've got the part number there, but all of this information I'm going to put in the video description below. So at the time of filming, retail price for these is £31.94 each. Then we're going to need a pair of washers, and these aren't a standard flat washer, they're a dished or concaved washer. I haven't been able to source these elsewhere. If you know, let me know in the comments below where you can get these. But the Nissan Leaf doesn't use these, so I'm assuming these are retaining the torque of the nut, acting a bit like a spring washer. From Nissan, these are £21.77 each. So next, the split pin or Cotter pins. Obviously you can't reuse these because these can break when you bend it back again, but the original Nissan ones aren't a standard split pin. You can see one leg is much longer than the other, which they are on normal split pins anyway, but not to this extreme. And actually only one leg goes all the way through the drive shaft, but you can use a normal split pin. But if you want to buy the proper Nissan ones, which if you don't have any you might as well, because you've got to buy these anyway, that Cotter pin is £4.36 each. But that is a 4.8mm diameter split pin, so an M5. So you could buy a set of stainless steel standard split pins on Amazon like that for £6.88, and you're going to get 288 other split pins that you got for spare for less than a pair of the Nissan ones. So again, I'll link to these in the video description below. So next, you're going to need the lubrication, and the correct stuff is Molykote M77 grease. It's more commonly referred to as Honda M77, but it's very expensive stuff. I've got 100 grams of it there. That's all you get in the pot, and that was £20 on eBay, and that was the cheapest I could find. But it's called Absolute Moly 60 paste. So you've got to look for the mounting paste or assembly paste version rather than the grease that you would use for bearings. But anyway, I'll link to this in the video description below, and also other similar products on Amazon. And then you're just going to need some basic tools, which again I will list in the video description below. Primarily you're going to need a 32mm socket, possibly a breaker bar, but you also crucially need a torque wrench. But even if you don't have the tools, you could still buy all the tools and the grease and the components for about half of what a Nissan dealer will charge you to do this job. And then of course you can do it multiple times in the future. So on the issue of whether you actually do need to buy replacements of these, I'll cover that at the end of the video. 90% of the viewers of this channel are not subscribed. I'm sorry to ask, but it would help greatly if you would. Just press the subscribe button. It's free and it shows YouTube you like this sort of vehicle related content. If you want to be notified when new videos are released, please click on the bell button also. Thank you, it really helps more than you would imagine. So first off, you've got to jack your car up, support it properly and take your wheel off. And if you don't know how to do that, then I would suggest you should pay someone else to do this job, because obviously safety is key when you're working on a jacked up vehicle. And in this case, we have got to get underneath to lubricate the back. And next we've got to take the split pin out by knocking the leg back up, pulling that out, and then taking the little caged frame off. And you can do that with a pair of pliers and a screwdriver, just to lever that up as much as you can, and then straighten that with pliers and then knock that through. So that one came out nice and easily. That frame should come off, and that's just a little caged frame which is then just going around the outside edges of your wheel nut. So the next job is to take that wheel nut off. So I'm going to put a bar there so I don't put any pressure on the park pull on the reduction gearbox. And undo that. And it's actually not very tight, so you don't need a particularly long breaker bar, and actually you probably don't even need a breaker bar. A normal bar will probably be enough, because weirdly these nuts are only torqued up to 130 Newton meters on the ENV200, which is ridiculously light. That's lighter than the wheel nuts on my car. So next we need to push that drive shaft in a little bit, and we need to give it a whack with a hammer, ideally a rubber or plastic mounted hammer. But what you can do is put this nut back on to protect the drive shaft and whack that. Doesn't take much, so it's unlikely you're going to damage the drive shaft anyway. And now that is free. And let's just get this washer out. So now from underneath the vehicle you can pull the drive shaft back as much as you can, and you need to get the lube inside there, and you'll be able to see the splines, and get it in there all the way around from the bottom, top and the other side, like that. Really work it in there as much as you can. And to aid that, you can get hold of the drive shaft with the other hand up here and pull that back. And that opens up the gap so you can get your lube all the way around. It's not quite as easy doing the top, but you can work it from this side and the other side and you will get it all in there. And then when you've done the back, you can try to do the front, but it's probably not going to achieve much with the brake disc in place, because you've got to get it beyond the brake disc. So I'm only doing this because I've got a long bristled brush. If you were to take the brake caliper assembly off, take the brake disc off, you would get in there much better. But I'm getting a little bit in there. The other issue is you're getting lube on the threads, which I've got to now remove before I put the nut back on. So you could miss this bit out, unless you're willing to take the brake disc and the brake caliper off. So because I've done that, I've now got to remove the grease from the drive shaft with some brake cleaner. So next, get your new washer and the new nut, and then we need to torque this up to only 130 Newton meters. And that does seem very little, but looking in this TSB, it's 180 Newton meters for a vehicle there. The Leaf is 121, but here I've got the workshop manual for the ENV200, and it says there 130 Newton meters for the hub nut. So my initial thought was, well, as this is such a common problem on these vehicles, maybe you should just torque this hub nut up to a slightly greater value, and that might stop the issue occurring so quickly. But then in the TSB here it says you mustn't torque it any higher than the specified value, otherwise the clicking noise could occur, and obviously you shouldn't have it any less than the specified torque, otherwise looseness could occur. And it also says if you reuse your lock nut, and also in this case the washer, the clicking noise could occur. And obviously this clicking noise of the drive shaft is all down to the torque of the hub nut here. And obviously that's why you can't reuse these, because there's a chance that it wouldn't then torque up to the correct value. However, 130 Newton meters isn't very much for a nut of this size. So the next job is to torque that up to 130 Newton meters. So next, put the little cage frame on and put a new split pin or Cotter pin in. And in this case, I'm using a M4 by 35 millimeters long. You can use an M5, which is a little bit more like the original, but I did that on the other side and I found the legs were so stiff to bend round. It was ridiculous, so using a slightly smaller one here. And then I need to flatten that round. Even an M4 pin, it's still quite difficult to bend those legs round. But anyway, that's now done. I can put the wheel back on. And on the E-NV200, your wheel nut should be torqued up to 113 Newton meters. And that's it. Obviously you've got to do the other side, but it's an hour's job in total, and all I need to do is put the wheel cover back on. So as I said, I'll link below to this Nissan TSB. I'll also include the section from the E-NV200 workshop manual, which covers the front wheel hub and the knuckle. And if you want to do the more thorough job where you take the drive shaft out of the hub completely, then I'll link to someone else's video where he does that on a Nissan Leaf, and it's the same procedure. And maybe at some point in the future I'll do the same on the E-NV200. And then also below I'll list all the tools you need for this job and also those Nissan parts. And all you've got to do to order them is go to your local Nissan dealer, give them the registration number of your vehicle, and then they will order the correct wheel nut, washer and split pin if you need it. But anyway, E-NV200s is all the same as what I'll list below. And below I'll link to the split pins, which will save you a bit of money and also give you 288 spare ones, and the correct mounting paste as well. So if you found this video useful, please do click the thumbs up. That really does help. Also ask any questions in the comments below, and also please do write comments. That helps the YouTube algorithm as well. If you want to know more about the Nissan E-NV200, there's also a link below to a playlist where you can see other videos I've made on these vans. Okie doke, I'll see you on the next one. So, should you replace all your hardware every time you do this job? Well, as for the split pin, that's pretty obvious. Yes, you're not going to want to reuse split pins because they break, so that's fair enough. As for the washer and hub nut, well, I have my doubts with this. My gut feeling is this hub nut is perfectly adequate to reuse because it doesn't incorporate any sort of locking mechanisms. So some hub nuts will have serrations on this flat edge, and it's sort of understandable that if you reuse it, those serrations could be worn and therefore it might not retain its torque. So it would be fair enough to fit a new one of those every time. Other hub nuts, like the ones used on the Nissan Leaf, for example, has an extension here, and you punch those down, well, you punch into that extension to lock it into the drive shaft. And again, that's fair enough because you have to re-punch it and you're effectively damaging your hub nut a second time. So If it incorporates some sort of locking or torquing mechanism, then yes, I would understand you should reuse it. But in this case, this is a big nut and there's no grooves, there's no nylon, there's nothing in there to help it to retain its torque. So do you really need to replace it? Well, my gut feeling is you don't. But if you look online, I've looked at other videos, everyone says you should replace these every time. So I will have to go with what other people say, is that they should be replaced. Maybe this thread gets damaged, but I've had a look at the other ones, and in this case, in these particular lock nuts where, hub nuts where there's no locking facility, my gut feeling is that's fine to reuse, unless it's damaged, of course. As for these washers, that's a different situation because these are concaved. So that is obviously being flattened a little bit when that is torqued up. So that is obviously doing the locking, as it were. But then this is only torqued to 130 Newton meters, and this is still a bit of thick metal. So whether that actually does flatten at all, I have my suspicions in this case, because it's not being torqued up to that higher value. So anyway, because this isn't flat, I could understand that that should be replaced. That makes sense. Whether you need to replace that as well, I'm not sure. But I haven't found a place to buy these apart from Nissan. So if you've got to buy that from Nissan, you might as well buy that as well. So, you know, for safety, then just go ahead and buy them. But I do really have my doubts on this particular type of hub nut. But anyway, let me know below what you think. Should you really replace these every time? It does seem a bit wasteful. But if they were only charging £6 or £7 or so for these, like they do on some of the other hub nuts, then I would say just buy it. But when these are so flipping expensive, I do have my doubt whether it's really worth spending the money on a new one. These hub nuts aren't holding your wheel on, and even if that did come untorqued, it can't come off because it's locked down with the split pin in this cage, and the split pin goes all the way through the drive shaft. So at worst, if that lost its torque, you're going to get a bit of movement on the splines, which is exactly what's happening to these vehicles anyway. And obviously if that movement's too much, you could damage the splines on your drive shaft, and you could damage the splines inside your hub there. So you would potentially, if it got really bad, have to replace both. But that sort of clicking noise is loose drive shafts, and they're all suffering from that anyway. So you tend to hear it way before this gets loose. And I've checked the torque of these on Nissan vehicles that are making the clicking noise, and the hub nuts, even before I take it off, are torqued up to the correct value, and this clicking issue still occurs. So my gut feeling on the E-NV200 model alone, yes, replace that washer because that's obviously applying some tension, and definitely replace the split pin, of course. But as for the hub nut, when there's no locking features built into it, I really can't see that you need to replace that every time, as long as your hub nuts are in good condition. But anyway, if you disagree and you've got good reasons, then write in the comments below, and I will pin your comments so everyone can see it.